This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Sober in Seattle. I'm here with Steve and Nancy, and they are going to talk to us this month about step 2, coming to believe in a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity. And I'm just going to turn it right over to very capable hands of Steve and Nancy. So tell us about step 2 and how you guys work step 2 and what you think about it.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for hosting this podcast. I think it's really fantastic, all of the work that you do to keep Greater Seattle Intergroup vital and informative. And thank you, Stephen, as always, for being here with me. So step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourself could restore us to sanity. And I love that step 2 is right after step 1, because hopefully through step 1, we have become convinced that our life as we had been living it was unmanageable, that we could not stop drinking on our own, that our life had become unmanageable, and that we needed to find another way. So most of us have come here through years of practice in trying to manage our life. And if you're an alcoholic, then maybe you came through with a crash and burn experience. I came into AA with a similar experience, and firmly believed that I would not be coming to AA when I first became aware of it. And of course, it was only 6 weeks after that my mind had changed. So obviously we have minds that can change. So this AA does not demand that we believe in any God, but it does ask us to look at what we do believe. Because our book tells us that we have an idea of God within us, and that we also have a lot of conceptions of God within us. And if we are in AA and we are looking at doing the steps, AA, the program, wants to equip us right from the beginning with an idea that we can come to believe in a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. I did not know that my conception of God, which step 2 asks us to consider, I didn't know that my conception of God was was so illogical and destructive and harmful. Basically, because I hadn't really looked at it. I just believed what I thought about God. And as our literature tells us, maybe it was an idea that was impressed on us as children. And I guarantee you, my upbringing did not stand in front of a chalkboard and say, God is cruel, God is an antagonist, and doesn't want you to know anything about love. But that's the idea that I had. Not knowing that, I spent a few years in AA with that belief uninvestigated and kind of unearthed. So my experience of step 2 came to me a few years into sobriety, and that was through a meditation that 3 years sober, that someone in a workshop had guided us through. And it was just the simple suggestion to bring to mind my conception of God. And so the room was quiet, our eyes were closed, my conception of God, it just arose in my mind. And it was an image of Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars. And I was like, oh, yes, Jabba the Hutt, Jabba the Hutt. And I'm not a Star Wars big fan, but I had seen that movie many years before. It was kind of given to me as an image, maybe a comical one, that I could say, oh yeah, that's God. God always takes away from me things that I love. God just throws people aside. God doesn't care about me at all. And as I'm looking at those thoughts, all of a sudden I became very aware that I was not looking at God. I was looking at my concept of myself. And it shocked me. It shocked me, but I didn't fall into judgment about that, which later I saw as a moment of grace, which, because I would normally fall into self-judgment, and then I wouldn't get any benefit from that seeing. So I did see that that's what I thought, that's what I was projecting my own false self-image onto God. But that seeing was very important to me. See, AA, it didn't demand that I believe in a God, but it did ask me to look at what I did believe. And so in order for me to go on with the rest of the steps, I needed to have a concept of God that was at least loving and guiding. And so I didn't even put those words on God, because that sight of what I had believed was so surprising to me and so helpful that I just said, God, I don't want to come up with another conception of you. I would just like to ask you to show me who you are. And then I went from there into, then I could, go into the rest of step 2, which our chapter on We Agnostics is just so beautiful, how it gently leads us into looking at that concept, seeing that it is completely inadequate, and that do I need a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity? Now, I already had been restored to a certain amount of sanity, right? Because I was no longer drinking. And I had 3 years in the program, and I did not fight drinking. It just didn't come up for me. It was like that urge and that obsession to drink was removed. So that was the first coming to believe. I could look at that as, well, I certainly didn't do that, because I have certainly tried many, many times to stop drinking, and I could not. And so I did have that experience to point to. And then that was something that I could then build on the rest of the program. The rest of the program could be built on that my original concept of God was faulty, and that I had already experienced a miracle of healing. So let me stop there and turn it over to Stephan for his inspiration. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. And thanks again for hosting, Lara. Step 2, I also have to start with step 1 in a grievous error that I made in step 1. I think I used to read step 1 as admitting I was powerless over alcohol, and by not drinking, my life would become manageable. By not drinking and going to AA, that somehow my life would become manageable. And step 2, and I guess step 3 we'll talk about next month, but step 2, I kind of passed over it because I didn't have any problem with God. Just from my upbringing, I didn't doubt that there was a God. It's just there was no friendship involved. There was no friendship with God. It was just, I hope he's not too mad at me. So like Nancy, I spent a couple of years in AA just trying to get my life right. and feeling more and more frustrated because the longer I didn't drink, it seemed that because it was true, the more messed up my life got in all the other areas, finance, relationship, job, and all that. So with step 2, to be restored to sanity, I think there's an admission involved that why would I need to be restored to sanity unless I am truly insane? And so then I thought, well, there's degrees of sanity. You know, I could be insane in a few of these areas, but not in these areas. And it was suggested to me that it could be that you are either sane or insane. And furthermore, which I had never heard anybody in AA say this until it was said to me, was if you're not happy and at peace, you're insane. And I thought, you know, I'd never heard that before. And so why would I believe in a power greater than myself if I didn't trust this power? That there even was a power. And you know, it was real helpful to me because the whole, I don't think in my life I ever used the expression higher power till I came to AA and heard that. I mean, sure, God and deity and all that stuff, but just never the term higher power. And I remember being asked, Steve, if there's a higher power, there must be a lower one, because a higher one has to be higher than something, or a lower one has to be lower than a higher. And somehow that kind of made sense to me. And I could have many, many examples of thinking very selfish, even deceitful thoughts, and from those produce actions that were at times, I suppose, even criminal. And I could see that that was coming from a place that was different than kindness and charity and helpfulness. So in that way, I saw, to me, it clicked. Oh, there is a higher power and there's a lower one. It's just I've lived my life pretty much on the lower power. Never mind, I'll scratch out pretty much. I just wanted my life to be good. And I assumed it was up to me to make it that way. So in step 2, it says, came to believe in a power greater than yourself. Where I came from a place where I just assumed I'd be able to figure it out. You know, listen to what they say at AA, judge it, maybe condemn it, maybe be impressed with it. But it was always, I was going to be the final filter. And then when people talked about kindness and amends and all that stuff, well, that was for them at this time. But that part about being restored to sanity really got to me because it just sounded like the truth. Like if AA has all the tools a person needs to be at peace and live a happy life, an abundant life, I certainly didn't have that. And for the longest time, and this was, as Nancy was talking about investigating our thoughts, this was before I even knew about that. I just figured if I stay in AA long enough and go to enough meetings, my thinking will change. Unfortunately, my thinking didn't change. It just got further cemented in what I felt was the right way to live my life. You know, me living my life. And I would see the old timers in AA kind of laugh when I would share. Actually, they still do sometimes, but laugh when I would share, because my share was all about here's what I need to do, here's what other people need to do. There was no talk about trying to find guidance from a higher power. It was all based on my lower or ego power. And so my conception of God, it just changed because I got real interested I got real interested in the realm of the spirit as far as what are the spiritual laws and principles and all that, and I still am. But one time I thought, what if my conception of God wasn't as God having a personality, which I really felt, I mean, that was just my conception of God. He was, a guy up in heaven with the big black book with my name and several pages of transgressions that somehow I was going to have to pay for later on. But he had a personality. He could be pleased with me. He could be angry with me. He could try and teach me some lessons, which is kind of funny in itself, because like God trying to teach me a lesson, like he couldn't figure it out. He's God, One day in How It Works, which, of course they read it at almost every meeting, they talked about one having all power. And I had never thought about God as a power, but I did understand the concept of power, because I could just translate it to the physical realm, like gravity is a power and not a personality. And the more I'm in alignment with the power of gravity, the safer and all that I'm going to be. I had a construction company for a while, and every single thing we built took into account gravity, because that's the way what you build is safe. And so I started thinking of, they talked about the loving power of God in our book. God's this, God's that, but they could all be attributed to power and not personality. And so I thought, geez, what if I'm wrong? Which was a real new concept for me, because not in an arrogant way. I just thought I knew it all, especially about the God stuff, because, the nuns taught me well, but it wasn't serving me well. And so when I was open to looking at a different conception of God, it really made sense. They talked about this power of God showing up as being kind and helpful to other people. And I would have said that's not my nature, but what if I was wrong about that too? What if it is our nature? And the consequences of behaving differently started to be far-reaching, instead of what can I get out of this, and the thoughts that all this stuff shouldn't have happened to me, and yet it did happen, and all the contradictions in my mind. And so this being restored to sanity, like, how does a person know? Again, like I said in the beginning when I started talking, I thought that not drinking and going to meetings and paying attention, that makes you sane. The not drinking part actually makes you sane. Not saying it doesn't help, but it sure didn't make me sane. I saw that I definitely had to be restored to sanity, and just in that word restored, meaning it's been there before. And I've heard speakers, and I probably said it too, because it was kind of funny to me, that I was born a loving, sane child of God, and then 11 seconds later, I got my own will. So step 2 for me was actually seeing that I needed to be restored to sanity, and drinking was no longer in the picture. I'd already stopped drinking. And so it had to be something different, and it had to be something different from the way I thought and tried to run my life, my whole life. And I found the answer to that in AA. In fact, just as far as the steps go, even though we're only talking about step 2, I had a different conception about the steps, that the steps are just there to help us on the path. But the path is way more than just the steps. Like, there's this is getting ahead a little bit, like there's no place in the steps, there's no step that says we avoid argument like the plague and fault finding like the plague. There's no step that says we've ceased fighting everything and everyone, even alcohol, but it's on the path that the steps put us on. And so there obviously, to me, had to be a power that I could draw on, that that I could walk that path that so many, hundreds of thousands of people before me walked, because I can think I'm different than a lot of people, but not different than everyone. And so they did it, and they wrote a book showing us how they did it. And so I learned to quit arguing with, well, they say this, but here's what I think. Because I found out after a while, I don't even care what I thought. Just here's what they did. Here was the result they got. And that's the result I want. So maybe it's not so difficult after all. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
So I have a question about step 2. When we're reading in We Agnostics, so that one line at one point it says, "Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself?" And as right, we can assure that you're well on your way if you can answer yes to that.
Yeah, they say we emphatically.
Right. So it's like, okay, great hope, and then just a few pages later, I was always struck, it says, God is either everything or else he is nothing. What is our choice to be? And that seems like so extreme compared to just a willingness to believe, that sometimes at different points in my sobriety, especially when I was first going through the steps, it was like, I'm just willing to believe. I'm just willing to say, yes, okay, God's everything, whatever. I mean, even though I didn't really even understand that, what that means. I mean, that phrase, God is everything, has come to mean more to me. And I feel like I've got a deeper understanding of what that means the longer I stay sober and the more experimentation and that I do with step 11. But can you talk to, to that point of God is either everything or else he is nothing, part of We Agnostics, when, at the beginning, when somebody is just fresh into step 2, what that could mean?
Well, let's see. God is everything. It also says somewhere in our book that God is inclusive, never exclusive. So for me, that over time, that became a rallying point of that I couldn't judge, that God was in everything, even if I didn't see it or perceive it in the circumstance or event. That was I willing to believe that I might not understand it. I don't understand it, but yet here it is. And that God is here somehow. And then, ask to be seen. It's like Stephen, when you said, is it to be restored to sanity? Like those early questions in step 2, where they do ask us to look at our belief. And as I looked at my belief, I saw that it was miserable, right? It was a miserable belief. And so then I can say, is it sane to believe in a God of misery? Is that sane? That isn't what I wanted anymore. That felt like what I had, a God of misery. So then it becomes, so God is not misery. So if I'm willing to believe that, then and that God is everything, and I might not understand that, and I do not understand that, of how that could be, just like watch the news, and say that God is everything, and yet I'm willing to believe, and I'm willing to be shown my prior assumptions, which I have been basing decisions on about what I see and then setting those aside, setting aside what I believe, in favor of being shown what is the truth here. I'm done.
Well, in that question, Lara, God is everything or nothing. What's our decision to be? When I was asked that question, when I was going through the book, before I answered it, we got to look at something else. And it was, just because you make a decision doesn't mean it's true. Or just because you believe something, your belief in it doesn't make it true. It may make it true for you, but like those that believe that the earth is flat, they can believe it with their whole heart and mind, but that doesn't make it, that just the belief in it doesn't make it true. It either is or it isn't. So trying to keep things real simple. And remember, I had a tendency to skip over all this stuff because I wasn't bothered by it like I thought I knew, except what I knew wasn't translated into a happy life. And so that decision, what if God is everything? And then what if he is? If that's true, it would sure change the way I related to pretty much every area in my life, if that was true. And I know I would always say, oh, yes, I believe God's everything, but you wouldn't know it from my behavior. You'd never imagine that I believed that. And it was in AA, like Nancy was saying, that I was taught that I can actually question my beliefs. It never occurred to me before. If it's in my mind, it must be true. Otherwise, what's it doing in there? And so, and then what was really, really helpful to me, probably started in step 2, Lara, was just that slogan, one day at a time. I used to like secretly scorn and, just kind of like, oh, isn't that cute? All these Alamo clubs and stuff have all these sayings on the wall. I guess for people that are slower learners than me. But yet, when I actually went to a workshop on one day at a time. And it really, really changed me. And I love that slogan in Alcoholics Anonymous now, because what if it's true that God's everything? Can my behavior support my belief just today? Just today, because I'm thinking way in the future, and if I do this, she'll do that, and all this kind of stuff. But then dialing it back, just like we did with our drinking, just for today. And as promised, and it's very predictable, although I didn't know it at the time, as promised, my life started changing right away. And so my answer to that question is, what if it is true? It would sure be a lot easier way to live than believing it wasn't true. That I guess that's my take.
Yeah, and step 2, it's the beginning of being open-minded. It's just the beginning.
So I have to remember back. I think we were at a workshop up in the mountains somewhere with Joe Hawk, and remember that. And so we were talking about how when you're coming into step 2, that you place yourself in a position of neutrality. Maybe there is a God, maybe there isn't, right? And that at the end of that, it's like Joe Hawk, I remember him saying, and if there isn't a God, I am totally screwed. So I really enjoyed what you said at first, Nancy, that it really makes a lot of sense, and that it's no mistake that step 2 directly follows step 1. It's out of similar to what the Daily Reflection said yesterday, the paradox where in the darkness is when God can come in, right? And so coming out of step 1, we're completely defeated, having no more good ideas, right? And then, like you were talking about step 2, really having to surrender again our ideas, our old ideas, right? Of what, and being open for a new experience of God. That's really awesome. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add?
Just one, in reading and looking at We Agnostics again a little bit this morning, I was reminded as I reread when Bill had his experience of in step 2, and he said he stood in the presence of infinite power and love. And if those aren't perfect attributes for God, a much better set of attributes than I had carried ignorantly and uninvestigated, it was certainly a needed re-supplanting of something to carry through the rest of the steps. Infinite power and love. Thank you.
Good job, Lara.
Good job, Stephen. And Nancy, of course. Well, thanks, you guys. This is exciting. I love this. Part 2 of our 12-part series to be carried throughout the rest of the year. And I am going to be recording Tradition 2 on Tuesday. So we're going to be doing Tradition through the rest of the year as well. Tradition.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes, it's all good. Perfect. So, well, thank you so much, you guys, and I will see you next month.
All right.
Oh, you're not going to be here Saturday?
I mean, next month for step 3.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, Steve and Nancy, thanks again.
See you later. Thank you.
Bye-bye.